hope to accomplish in your first 6 months as superintendent?
I'd hope to really have a deep understanding of the district. I think it would be a crime to come in and just shake everything up. I think what's really important from a leadership perspective is to really get to know the district, to get to know the community stakeholders, to get to know the staff, get to know the students, build trusting relationships. And once those things are deeply ingrained, then we can certainly have a chance to really tackle the things that need to be tackled. We can celebrate the things that we absolutely need to celebrate, and we just need to meet student success in the best ways that we can.
So, if you have a particular way you like having things done, certain protocols and procedures, how would you handle the situation when somebody says to you, that's not how we do that in Taylor, or it's not the Taylor way?
That's an interesting question. Here's the good thing about my ego. It's not big enough to have one way to do it. So I think that, you know, when you say the Taylor way, we certainly have the Monroe way. Excuse me for a second. And so as a leader, I think that it's very important that you respect community norms, community values, community mores. I mean, it's the Taylor way for a reason. So that doesn't mean that the Taylor way can't be enhanced possibly. And I think that everything in life certainly can be improved or enhanced. But to come back to the initial question about having things my way, please don't misunderstand. I can certainly be very strong in conviction, particularly in the name of students. But I'm not someone who's autocratic that slams my fist and decides that it has to be my way. I think in terms of my leadership style, I'm sort of a quasi-collaborative and servant leader. And so my approach would be that collectively, if the Taylor way is the way to do it, let's look at it and let's sort of fish out every one of the tenets and decide, can this part of the Taylor way be improved, or should it stay the same, because we're not going to fix anything that isn't broken. So that's sort of how I would tackle it.
Thank you.
All right. If you would discuss how you would go about right-sizing a district.
That's a big one. I'm going to take 2 sips of water. We've been there, and it's a difficult task because on the one hand, we knew that we absolutely had to right size, and we did not have a choice because of declining enrollment and because of the status of some of our buildings. They were old, and it would have cost us way too much to do the repairs. On the other hand, you're talking about buildings that have been in our community, some of them almost a century. And these are people's second homes. This is where they grew up. This is where their parents went to school. This is where their grandparents went to school. Some great-grandparents went to school. And so these are really, your school is a huge part of your community. So it's very difficult to look people in the face and say, in the name of kids, we need to make some really harsh decisions. So when we did that, we really, again, my whole premise about going slow to then go fast, it's really important to not make egocentric decisions, but again, to have the student in mind and to look at all components. Status of the building, boundaries, which, if we had to close buildings, which ones should be closed and why, and it certainly wouldn't be necessarily for reasons other than what the right thing to do is in the name of students. Some of the things I can tell you, and I think I mentioned this the last time that I was here, was that as one of the leaders in the district, and I was one of the prime leaders, and one of the principals of the district that we closed, I almost felt like a funeral director, because we really had to hold people's hands, present company included. It was a huge loss for us. But what we did try to do was, when everyone came to terms with the fact that it had to be done, we really tried to find ways to celebrate that and to make sure that those buildings and those stories and that history didn't go forgotten or unnoticed. So we were able to salvage some really neat memorabilia. In one of the schools that was 100 years old, we kept the archway, and so we have that sort of in museum status that we share for different celebrations. We've had bricks that people have saved, and so those have all been archived, just sort of in the memory of these schools to make sure that those special places weren't forgotten. But the most important thing, I think, is to involve all stakeholders, to have a voice, and to really make sound decisions in terms of what's best for the district and what's best for the students.
Thank you.
All right. Do you have a specific way of improving achievement scores you have done in your past as a district leader?
At the risk of sounding redundant, it sounds very much like the question that I answered a few questions ago. I think it's really important to make your decisions based on data. So I think at a district level, it's important to see the big picture in terms of where student achievement is, but student achievement happens in the schools. And so I think it's really important to have sort of a common practice in terms of best practice for teachers. So one of the ways that we do that is that, again, I go back to that whole idea of best practice with workshop model, where teachers really have a hands-on approach in terms of knowing where their students are at. We also conduct something called a SAT meeting, and so what that is, it means student assistant team meeting, and so we involve all stakeholders at a building level, and this is in every building within our district. So you would, depending on the need of the student, you would have the principal, the school improvement coach, our counselor, our special education teacher. Even if the student does not have an IEP, that is our expert in terms of interventions for students. So we invite the special education teacher to the party, and we also have a student success personnel that comes, and that person meets the social and emotional needs of our students. And so it really is a collaborative approach, and we look at the whole child, try to figure out where the gaps are, or if there's the problem and the real problem. Is this a student who really is a student who needs special services, or is this just a student who's faltering? So when you attack those things at a building level, we find that we've had major success. What we've done in terms of creative ways of approaching this, we've taken some of our title money and our 31A money, and we've hired what we call interventionists. We have a solid foundation in leveled literacy. It's a Fontes and Pinnell program, and it's highly renowned, very successful. And so we have a language arts interventionist that does pull out, and we have a math interventionist that does push in. And so if you can imagine, to put that on hold for a quick second, that has to be overlapped with a block schedule. So at the elementary, what we do is every teacher is put into a team. So if you're a two-taught school, which means you have two teachers at every grade level, that is your teaching partner. And so your master schedule would be such that if I'm a second grade teacher, I'm teaching language arts at 9 o'clock, you're teaching language arts at 9 o'clock. So that gives that opportunity for co-teaching. And so there are two sets of eyes on a large group of students. Somewhere in that day is what we call enrichment and intervention. And so within that time, we coordinate students either in terms of need of intervention or enrichment. And so then what you do is you take your manpower and you make sure during that IE time, and it scales down throughout the day. And so this would be at elementary, same thing would happen on the bell schedule at middle school, and then the same concept would happen at the high school, where during this time, you have possibly 5 people in a classroom to be to attack the needs of a student. So in terms of enrichment, you may have one teacher that has a larger group of students, and you can do some really innovative and creative things with technology that's infused into the curriculum. With the interventionist, you take small groups of kids and you meet their needs on a daily basis. The amazing thing about that is that it's not status quo, where you have the bluebirds that stay with you for the next 8 weeks. This is organic and based on your lesson, and then based on the data that you've collected from a formative way, you may change your intervention groups on a daily basis, depending on their need. And so I think that when you sort of go from the ground level up and you look at how you do your business in a school, it certainly from a district leadership perspective gives you sort of a bird's eye view and an umbrella approach to what the scores are going to be and what student achievement is going to look like. But I think that it's most important that the district as a whole, K-12 is rooted in best practice instruction.